Well, hello, this is Darlene with Friends of Fairview. We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving Fairview Cemetery right here in New Albany, Indiana, and preserving the legacies and the stories of the people that are buried right here. And today's story is the story of the Lucy Walker tragedy. So the Lucy Walker was a steamship, a steamboat that would go up and down the Ohio River, and it exploded on October 23, 1844, with 130 passengers aboard. We have 16 of the casualties, the Lucy Walker victims, are buried right here in Fairview Cemetery. So today's story is going to just focus on them and their story and what happened. So first I'm just going to go over the story of the tragedy, and then I will introduce us to who is buried here. We'll talk about the people from the Steamboat Lucy Walker tragedy that are buried here in Fairview. So we'll do that at the end. But first, the tragedy of the steamboat. What happened? What is the story there? So rather than just relate it myself and probably not do as good of a job as just reading you the article that was published the day after the incident. So this was published in the Courier Journal, the Louisville Courier Journal, on October 24, 1844, the day after the explosion. And it recounts the first-person eyewitness account of a Captain Dunham who just happened to be nearby on his own boat when the Lucy Walker exploded. And he was the first one to rush to the aid of the victims and the survivors and do what he could to help there. So the Courier Journal article that I'm about to read to you, published the very next day from this tragedy, relates the story of Captain Dunham, the first responder to the event. And it goes like this. It is with feelings the most acute and painful that we record the following fearful disaster and the loss of so many valuable lives. The Steamboat Lucy Walker, Captain Vaughn, left this place for New Orleans yesterday, crowded with passengers. When about 4 or 5 miles below New Albany and just before sunset, some part of her machinery got out of order and the engine was stopped in order to repair it. While engaged in making the necessary repairs, the water in the boilers got too low, and about 5 minutes after the engine had ceased working, her 3 boilers exploded with tremendous violence and horrible and terrific effect. The explosion was upwards, and that part of the boat above the boilers was blown into thousands of pieces. The U.S. snag boat Gopher, Captain L.B. Dunham, was about 200 yards distant at the time of the explosion. Captain Dunham was immediately on the spot, rescuing those in the water and with his crew rendering all the aid in his power. To him we are indebted for most of our particulars. He informs us that the Lucy Walker was in the middle of the river, and such was the force of the explosion that parts of the boilers and the boat were thrown on shore. Just after the explosion, the air was filled with human beings and fragments of human beings. One man was blown up 50 yards and fell with such force as to go entirely through the deck of the boat. Another was cut entirely in two by a piece of the boiler. We have heard many such heart-rending and sickening incidents. Before Captain Dunham reached the place where the Lucy Walker was, he saw a number of persons who had been thrown into the river drown. He, however, saved the lives of a large number of persons by throwing them boards and ropes and pulling them on his boat with hooks. Immediately after the explosion, the lady's cabin took fire, and before it had been consumed, she sunk 12 or 15 feet of water. Thus is presented the remarkable circumstances of a boat exploding, burning, and sinking all in a space of a few minutes. The screams, and the exclamations of the females and those who were not killed is represented as having been distressing and awful. We believe none of the females on board were injured. Some, however, may have been drowned. The books of the boat were destroyed, and of course it will be impossible ever to ascertain the names or the number of those killed. There were at least 50 or 60 persons killed and missing, and 15 or 20 wounded, some seriously. Captain Dunham left the wounded at New Albany, all of whom were kindly and well cared for by the hospitable and humane citizens of that town. Captain Dunham deserves the thanks of the community for his humane and vigorous exertions to save the lives of, and his kindness and attention to the sufferers. He stripped the boat of every blanket, sheet, and everything else necessary for their comfort. Mr. John Hickson and Mr. Henry Beebe, passengers on the Lucy Walker, deserve notice for their coolness and their efficient exertions in saving the lives of drowning persons. So after that, the article just goes on to just list the names of the people that they knew at the time who were killed, missing, wounded, all of that, whatever people that they could figure out the names, because it said the books just went down with the ship, so they don't even have a full passenger list to even know who all the people were that were on the ship, to even know who's all missing. They only could know by the survivors, the wounded who were still alive, those dead bodies that they were able to fish out of the water and identify as to some of the people that were on the list. But a full passenger list has never been known, will never be known, and so there are many people that are, they just got lost at sea, just lost. If you remember, the description said that some people were blown in parts, blown to pieces, literally, when the explosion happened. And so some of the remains of the bodies may not have been recoverable. And so, some people are just going to ever and always be missing. But it can be assumed that they perished in the explosion of the Lucy Walker on October 23, 1844. So one thing that one of the articles that happened right after that, it came out like the next day or so, stated the fact that the captain, the Lucy Walker, actually, they left from the wharf there at Louisville, and there was some trouble with the boiler, I think it was like the force pump or something in a boiler, was what the article said, and that the captain, rather than staying to make sure that the repairs were completed, just decided to push on and keep going to New Orleans and try and figure out what was going on, have his engineers and maintenance people work on the engine while they were going. Well, that turned out to be a fatal and tragic decision that captain made, Captain Vaughn, who did perish in the explosion himself. He went down with the ship. So the listing of the victims did tell us, it lists in the newspaper, the 16 people who were buried here in Fairview. And I'm going to recount that list now. And then I will show you the burial grounds, or the areas where they are buried. So first, the list. A.E. Edwards was traveling with his brother. His brother was saved. They were from Shelbyville, Kentucky. Mr. Norris, his residence is unknown, but it was supposed that he was from Kentucky. Jacob Meeker from Madison, Indiana. William Watt from Starkville, Mississippi. James Doris from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Jacob Nallner from Washington City, which I'm suspecting that means Washington, D.C. His family was from Petersburg, Virginia. Miss Rebecca Foster, who was the daughter of A.H. Foster. A.H. Foster, his wife, and 2 other children were saved. They were all from Greensburg, Virginia. Mr. McKay, second clerk of the ship. He was an officer of the boat. Reverend Joseph McCreary from Wilcox, Alabama. J.P. Harrison. We don't know where he's from. Miss Webb, who was the daughter of a Dr. Webb. Dr. Webb was badly wounded. Another one of his daughters was saved, but his brother-in-law and a servant were missing, and they were all from Princeton, Kentucky. So Dr. Webb lost a daughter. One daughter was saved, and a brother-in-law and servant were missing. Then 2 bodies that were badly burned, 2 African Americans, names unknown, and one unknown person that they don't know who it is. So these are the people that were buried here in Fairview Cemetery for the Lucy Walker explosion. There is only one grave headstone to tell you that they were here, that they are even here. So let me show you that one headstone to mark where they are. It's right over here. So we're in front of the grave of A.E. Edwards, who was killed by the explosion of the steamer Lucy Walker, October 23, 1844. He was only 22 years old. And if we look right here, we see the original headstone that was so damaged that it looks like a new one was created for him. We can see there, it says exactly the same thing, in memory of A.E. Edwards, who was killed by the explosion of the Lucy Walker steamer, October 23rd, 1844, age 22 years. So his is the only headstone. Now remember A.E. Edwards, he is the one whose brother survived. He was traveling with his brother and they were from Shelbyville, Kentucky. And they survived, or his brother survived, and unfortunately for 22-year-old A.E. Edwards, he did not. So now, as I said, A.E. Edwards is the only one, I'm standing right here, the only one that has a headstone. But the other 15 victims of the Lucy Walker are buried all right here in this area. Some random headstones are here and there, but they are not from the Lucy Walker victims. So I think the victims are just buried in and among and between where there were empty places, and the rest of them are unmarked. So let me show you the area here. If I turn around a little bit, you can see all this open area where there's no graves, right? No graves, no headstones. We've got some more right here. No graves, no headstones. But all that big, huge, wide open area. All of the Lucy Walker victims are all buried here where A.E. Edwards is. So it can be assumed that that unmarked area, that open space, is where they must be located. Because they are buried where he is buried, and that's the only spot where we would fit, where other people aren't buried. So that is likely where they are. Now, I want to read you one last thing. Let's get back to A.E. Edwards here, our one and only headstone. One last thing I want to read to you. It was in the article 2 days after the explosion in the Courier-Journal on October 25, 1844. So just 2 days after the explosion. And this little section, there's an article giving a few more details that they were able to kind of figure out, but there's this one little paragraph that really stuck out to me, and I want to read it to you now. A deep gloom pervaded our city yesterday on account of the terrible accident on the Lucy Walker. Even politics was for the first time forgotten, and the awful calamity became the subject of everyone's conversation. Numbers of our citizens who were as light-hearted and happy and gay as ourselves, and who were with us in the morning, were suddenly hurried into eternity. Another startling exemplification of the uncertainty of human life. And so that little statement, that little paragraph really stuck out to me in the article about the Lucy Walker. This was just a couple days after the explosion happened that this little paragraph was written. And it is a reminder to all of us, right, that at any moment we could be, it could be our turn. And so I think there's a lesson there for us, right? And one reason why I love cemeteries is because they help me stay present to the fact that I am also mortal, and that one day I will be one of the people here. And so how do I want to live the remaining days of my life, right? So I think the story of the Lucy Walker just is another reminder for us to just hug our loved ones a little tighter, right? To do that thing we've been wanting to do. What bucket list do we have, right? What are those items on our bucket list that we want to make sure we do before we go? What is that secret dream that we've been always thinking that we wanted to do before we die? Like, did we want to write a book, right? Do we want to write a book? Do we want to start a business? Do we want to go to visit Paris, France, or some other city? Has it been our dream to do that, right? What is it that we've been dreaming to do? Because it's just important to remember that, and important to not wait till tomorrow, because tomorrow never gets here. Someday never arrives, right? And if we someday ourselves all the way down our life, all the way throughout our life, then one day when it's our turn, we'll find ourselves ushered into eternity without a moment's warning, and then it will be too late. So if the story of Lucy Walker can do anything for us, is this to teach us how valuable and precious life really is, and to use our days wisely, right? I'll just leave you with a quote, one of my favorite quotes by a man named Jim Rohn, and it goes like this: days are expensive. When you spend a day, you have one less day to spend. Make sure you spend each one wisely. Jim Rohn. And so with that, I'll leave us there, and wish you all a beautiful rest of your day. And until the next time, goodbye.